In the vast canvas of time, long before chronicles and empires left their mark, the land we now call Andalusia was a kingdom of silence, a silence broken only by the wind in the mountains and the echo of beasts now extinct. But in the shadows of its caves, a human story began to be written, not with ink, but with fire, stone, and mystery. Who were the first to call this corner of the world their home? And what indecipherable secrets did they bequeath us in the darkness? The first faces we can glimpse through the fog of time belong to the Neanderthals. Approximately 40,000 years ago, these robust hunter-gatherers left their mark in the form of stone tools and enigmatic engravings. Their remains, scattered like the pieces of a colossal puzzle, suggest an existence of struggle and adaptation. They were not mere cave dwellers, but beings with a complex relationship with their environment, whose inner world we have only just begun to understand. The setting they inhabited was a place of extremes. The icy pulse of the last glaciation was slowly yielding, giving way to a reborn landscape, fertile and wild, where the hunting of large mammals and the gathering of fruits were the daily sustenance. To survive, they had to make crucial decisions every day. How did these primordial groups organize themselves? What beliefs or rituals guided their hunts under skies that no one remembers anymore? The protagonists of this remote era left no names for posterity, but their ingenuity was the foundation upon which future civilizations would be built. The true turning point, the revolution that would change everything, was not a war, but a seed. The development of agriculture and the domestication of animals marked a momentous shift. For the first time, human roots clung to the Andalusian soil, and from it sprang the first villages, the first whispers of a stable community. The events that followed this awakening were the result of a long evolution. As agriculture became established, communities grew more complex, forging bonds that went beyond mere survival. Tools evolved, farming techniques were perfected, and for the first time, the concept of property began to take root. The transition from nomadism to sedentism opened a range of possibilities, but also planted the seeds of future conflicts over resources. The cultural manifestations of these settlements are a testament to their inner world. Cave paintings in places like Nerja or La Pileta speak to us of rituals, myths, and a deep bond with nature. The symbols that adorn their walls are echoes of a world where the sacred and the everyday were intertwined. Nature was not merely a resource, but a powerful force. Yet the mystery persists. What did those symbols truly mean? What stories would those who painted them tell? With the mastery of metal, the Bronze Age brought forth new protagonists. The Iberians. Settled in the peninsula between the 2nd and 1st millennium before Christ, these peoples of diverse origins wove a rich cultural tapestry. They were skilled in metallurgy and agriculture, and their abilities made them key players in a trade network that extended throughout the Mediterranean. But what drove these peoples to form more complex structures? The need for protection and resource management were decisive. The development of hill forts and fortifications became a symbol of power and organization. Adobe and stone houses rose as witnesses to a daily life that, although marked by struggle, also flourished in art and spirituality. The repercussions of these changes were profound. Social hierarchies began to take shape, giving rise to an elite that controlled resources and trade routes. This dynamism was not without tensions. The competition for control of fertile lands and trade routes led to confrontations and alliances. The history of Andalusia began to be woven with the threads of ambition, cooperation, and conflict. The enigma surrounding these early inhabitants is, in essence, a reflection of the human condition, the search for identity and meaning. As the remnants of their lives emerge from the earth, we ask ourselves, what secrets remain hidden in the shadows of history? What stories would they tell us if they whispered to the wind? And so, with the foundations already laid, the stage was set for the emergence of a civilization wrapped in legend. A kingdom whose name ancient sources mention with a mixture of wonder and mystery, Tartessos. Was it a real empire or a gilded myth? The answer awaits us in the next stage of our journey into the depths of time. If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The decline of prehistoric cultures would give way to a cultural and commercial flourishing that would mark the history of the Iberian Peninsula. On the horizon of Andalusian history, an enigmatic civilization emerged. Tartessos, this culture, whose existence has been the subject of debate between myth and reality, stood as a focal point of economic activity and knowledge. Its legacy, although shrouded in questions, offers keys to understanding the foundations of Andalusian society. The historical context surrounding Tartessos is situated around the first millennium before Christ, in a period where the first city-states began to flourish in the Mediterranean basin. The Iberian Peninsula was at a crossroads, where the Andalusian lands offered not only agriculture but also abundant mineral resources, especially metals such as gold and silver. This environment facilitated the arrival of Phoenician merchants who, attracted by the wealth of the region, established contacts with local communities. The coasts of Andalusia were a gateway to the world, where cultural and economic exchanges intertwined. At the heart of this civilization, key figures emerged who would mark its destiny. Ancient accounts mention monarchs who ruled with remarkable political skill, such as the legendary king Argantonio, who, according to chronicles, extended Tartessian power through alliances and trade. His strategic decisions not only consolidated the influence of Tartessos, but also transformed it into a crucial center of exchange, attracting merchants from distant lands. The historicity of Argantonio is debated, but his figure represents the peak of this kingdom. The development of Tartessos was characterized by a flourishing of advancements in architecture, art, and technology. The Tartessian cities, such as the mythical Gadir, present-day Cadiz, were built with stone constructions and temples. The material culture of Tartessos, rich in goldsmithing and ceramics, reflects a society that not only traded but also valued artistic expression. This cultural exchange was not limited to the Phoenicians. The Greeks, upon their arrival, were also influenced by Tartessian sophistication. The emergence of these new actors on the Andalusian stage, however, raised questions about the future of the local civilization. With the rise of trade, Tartessos became a fundamental player in the network of commercial relations in the Mediterranean. The maritime routes connecting the peninsula with the Middle East and North Africa flourished, allowing for the exchange of precious metals, agricultural products, and luxury goods. The Tartessians, skilled navigators, ventured far from their coasts, establishing ties that crossed seas. However, this exponential growth also attracted the interest of neighboring powers. As Tartessos prospered, its wealth became a target for those who wished to control its resources. As time progressed, the consequences of this interconnection became evident. Tartessian influence extended beyond the borders of its own region, affecting surrounding cultures. However, the very trade that had facilitated its rise also contributed to its decline. The commerce that had brought wealth also brought instability. As neighboring peoples began to rival for control of trade routes and regional resources, the splendor of Tartessos seemed destined to be ephemeral, trapped in a cycle of rise and fall. The great enigma of this period becomes more intriguing when considering its mysterious disappearance. By the 6th century before Christ, historical records begin to fade. The Tartessian civilization, which once shone brightly, crumbled, leaving behind only echoes of its greatness. Ancient texts refer to a cataclysm or invasions that may have precipitated its fall, but the details remain veiled in uncertainty. Was it the ambition of its leaders that led to its ruin? Or did external forces prove to be too powerful? The influence of Tartessos, although its status as a unified political entity was temporary, left an indelible mark on Andalusian history. Its legacy merged with that of the Phoenicians and Greeks, creating a cultural melting pot that would shape later societies. The importance of its trade and its role as an intermediary in Mediterranean relations laid the foundations for future civilizations. The question that persists is, what secrets still awaited in the depths of Tartessos and in its legacy? As we delve into the next chapter of our historical journey, we will begin to explore how the arrival of the Phoenicians and Greeks further transformed the cultural and economic landscape of Andalusia. What new elements will intertwine in this rich tapestry, and how will they change the course of a region that had already known splendor? The flourishing Tartessian civilization would soon witness the arrival of new cultural currents that would transform its horizon. As the Mediterranean became a vast field of exchange, the coasts of Andalusia began to vibrate with the influence of two great peoples of antiquity, the Phoenicians and the Greeks. These peoples, recognized for their expertise in navigation and their extensive trade networks, not only brought material goods but also ideas, technologies, and ways of life that would leave an indelible mark on the development of the region. The historical context in which this arrival occurs is fundamental to understanding its impact. By the 9th century before Christ, the maritime routes of the Mediterranean were in full swing, and the Andalusian coasts presented themselves as an attractive destination. The Phoenicians, coming from present-day Lebanon, were known for their navigational skills and their dense trade network. In this juncture, Andalusia was not only a transit point but also a place of exchange where gold, silver, and other precious metals from Tartessos began to attract the attention of these merchants. As the Phoenicians established their colonies, such as Gadir, present-day Cadiz, and Malacca, today Malaga, the history of Andalusia began to intertwine with that of a broader world. The decisions made by Phoenician leaders were crucial. Figures such as Hiram I of Tyre, king of one of the most powerful cities of Phoenicia, are considered key figures in the expansion of these colonies. Under his sphere of influence, expeditions were sent that sought not only wealth but also the establishment of trade enclaves. Their alphabet, a precursor to many later writing systems, would become one of the most enduring legacies of their presence. The development of events that led to the consolidation of these colonies was a complex process. With the establishment of Gadir around the year 1100 before Christ, the Phoenicians not only created a commercial center but also laid the foundations for a syncretic culture. The influences of local traditions merged with Phoenician ones, giving rise to a cultural exchange that enriched both parties. Phoenician religious practices, which worshipped deities such as Baal and Astarte, began to blend with the beliefs of the Tartessians, generating a syncretism that was reflected in everyday life. In turn, the Greeks, following the routes of their Phoenician predecessors, also arrived on the Andalusian coasts in the 8th century before Christ. Their incursion was not just an echo of colonization but an expansion of their sphere of influence. They founded cities such as Ampurias and Rosas in present-day Catalonia, but their gaze also turned towards Andalusia, where trade and agriculture promised prosperity. The decisions of leaders such as Pericles, who during his tenure promoted Greek naval expansion, facilitated these incursions. As new contacts were established, the exchange of products such as olive oil and wine became an economic engine. The initial impact of these colonizations was profound. The Andalusian economy transformed as agriculture intensified with the introduction of new techniques and crops, adopting practices that would increase production. Trade routes diversified, establishing Andalusia as a strategic node in Mediterranean trade. However, despite this flourishing, a question arose. What would be the fate of the indigenous cultures in the face of this tide of external influences throughout the 9th and 8th centuries before Christ? The echo of these interactions was felt in every corner of Andalusia. The arrival of new peoples brought with it a blend of traditions and knowledge, but it also raised the question of the emerging Andalusian identity. In this panorama, how would the culture that was being born be defined? The shadow of the Phoenicians and the Greeks loomed in the twilight of a history yet to be written. The great mystery of this period hangs over the duality of these influences. While the Phoenicians and Greeks brought knowledge and wealth, they also began to alter the social structure of the indigenous communities. What consequences would this transformation have on the cultural identity of Andalusia? Would it be an enrichment or the loss of its essence? The answers to these questions remain suspended in the air like an echo of ancient voices that still resonate in the Andalusian lands. Thus, as the Phoenician and Greek influence solidified, a new chapter in the history of Andalusia was being forged, soon to be enveloped in the sphere of influence of the Carthaginian Empire. How would this region face the expansion of a new power? The arrival of the Phoenicians and their cultural exchange with the indigenous peoples was the prelude to an even more decisive chapter in the history of Andalusia. A new power was rising on the horizon of the Iberian Peninsula, and its name resonated strongly: Carthage. Since its founding in the 9th century before Christ, this city-state became an epicenter of trade and expansion. Carthaginian ambition, driven by the quest for resources and new lands, would soon chart a new course in Andalusian history. By the end of the 6th century before Christ, the Iberian Peninsula was in a delicate balance of power. The Phoenician cities of Gadir and Malacca were flourishing, and local cultures were undergoing significant transformation. However, the arrival of the Carthaginians, heirs to the Phoenicians, would bring about a new dynamic. Carthaginian expansion focused on controlling the trade routes of the Mediterranean and exploiting the rich mineral resources of the region. But what led Carthage to set its sights on Andalusia? The Carthaginians, under the leadership of generals such as Hamilcar Barca and later his son Hannibal, saw in the Andalusian lands a bridge to the conquest of new routes and markets. In the year 237 before Christ, Hamilcar Barca arrived in Hispania with the intention of consolidating Carthaginian power. His strategy was clear: to ally with local tribes and establish a network of control that would allow him to safeguard Carthage's interests. Thus, the Carthaginians established themselves in strategic enclaves such as Gades and Carthago Nova, where they could oversee trade and resource exploitation. At this juncture, the figure of Hannibal emerges as a central character. With his arrival on the political scene, tensions between Carthage and Rome intensified. Hannibal, determined to avenge the defeats suffered by his city after the First Punic War, found in Andalusia the ideal battlefield to launch his campaign against Rome. Hannibal's incursion into the Iberian Peninsula was not only a matter of revenge, but also of military strategy. His goal was to consolidate an empire that could challenge Roman hegemony. Hannibal made decisions of great strategic risk. In a move that would resonate through the centuries, he decided to cross the Alps to bring the war to the very gates of Rome. But before that epic journey, his consolidation in Andalusia was key. Victories in battles such as the one at Cannae in the year 216 before Christ seemed to tip the scales in his favor. But they also bound Hannibal to the necessity of maintaining control over his territories in Hispania. The tensions between Carthage and Rome culminated in an open conflict that would indelibly mark the history of the region. The Roman legions, led by figures such as Publius Cornelius Scipio, began to move southward. The Battle of Ilipa in the year 206 before Christ dealt a devastating blow to Carthaginian ambition in Andalusia. Scipio, with military cunning comparable to that of Hannibal, managed to unite the local tribes against him, resulting in a crushing defeat for the Carthaginians. The repercussions of this series of confrontations were profound. The defeat of Carthage in the Second Punic War not only meant the loss of its control in the Iberian Peninsula, but also the beginning of a process of Romanization that would forever alter the cultural and political landscape of Andalusia. The region, rich in resources and strategically located, would become one of the most important provinces of the Roman Empire. But in this shift of power, what legacies remained from the Carthaginian presence? The mystery that persists in the history of Andalusia is the transformation of the cultural identity of the region. While Romanization brought advancements in infrastructure, trade, and political organization, the traces of Carthaginian heritage remain in the cultural substratum of Andalusia, in its traditions and in the memory of its peoples. The question that remains is, how much of ancient Carthage persists in the essence of Andalusia? As the influence of Carthage fades, a new era looms on the horizon. The arrival of Rome and its subsequent domination would usher in a period of radical changes that would shape the Andalusia we know today. History, in its incessant dance, prepares us to delve into the Roman conquest of Andalusia, a journey that will lead us to discover how the culture and identity of the region were shaped by the hand of the Roman Empire. The departure of the Carthaginians would usher in a new chapter in the history of Andalusia, one that would mark the beginning of an era of profound transformation, the Roman conquest. The arrival of the legions of Rome would bring not only military power, but also a new way of life. A new culture that would spread like a mantle over the ancient Iberian lands. In this context, Andalusia, rich in resources and strategically located, would become a primary target for the conquerors. The 3rd century before Christ unfolds as a stage of tensions and conflicts. The Roman Republic, in its quest for expansion, finds itself caught in a constant struggle with Carthage. The Punic Wars, which shake the Iberian Peninsula, create a power vacuum that the Roman legions are ready to fill. On the horizon, Roman generals such as Publius Cornelius Scipio prepare to carry out the invasion that would forever change the fate of Andalusia. How would the integration of this region into the vast Roman Empire unfold? The arrival of Rome was not a simple act of colonization. It was a process of Romanization where Roman culture, language, and customs intertwined with local traditions. With the fall of Carthage after the Second Punic War in 201 before Christ, Andalusia became a crucial territory for the Romans, who established provinces such as Hispania Ulterior and later Hispania Baetica. These provinces were not only administered by Rome, but also became centers of trade, culture, and power. The main actors in this transition are diverse, from the Roman senators who made decisions in distant Rome to the local leaders who were forced to adapt to the new reality. One of the most prominent figures in this narrative is Scipio himself, whose victory at the Battle of Zama not only changed the course of the war, but also laid the foundations for Roman expansion on the peninsula. However, we must not forget the indigenous leaders who faced the conquest with resistance. Among them were the Iberian peoples who, although outnumbered and outarmed, did not easily surrender. The Romanization of Andalusia was a complex and multifaceted process. Cities developed, flourished under Roman order, and became centers of culture and administration. The architectural legacy that can still be perceived today in cities such as Cordoba or Seville is a testament to this process. Roman infrastructures such as roads, aqueducts, and theatres were built to integrate the region into the empire's communication network. However, Romanization was not only a physical phenomenon, it was also cultural. The Latin language imposed itself, and Roman customs began to displace local ones, creating a breeding ground for a new identity. Over time, the integration of Andalusia into the Roman Empire brought with it a constant flow of goods and people. Trade routes intensified, and the region became a vital economic center. Agricultural production, especially of olive oil and wine, reached unprecedented levels, and Andalusia began to be seen as one of Rome's granaries. However, this economic development was not without tensions. Social inequalities grew, and local elites adapted to the new order, while the lower classes often found themselves in precarious situations. The direct impact of Romanization was the alteration of the cultural identity of indigenous communities. Resistance turned into assimilation, and the history of Andalusia began to be written from a Roman perspective. Local traditions, gods, and customs were eclipsed by a new order, a new horizon that promised greatness but also brought with it the loss of the ancestral. The struggle for control of land, resources, and identity intensified, leaving a shadow that would extend through the centuries. The great unknown of this period is profound. What does Romanization truly mean for Andalusian identity? The history of this region is marked by a duality, a fusion of cultures that leads us to question the very concept of identity. As Romanization solidified, a new Andalusia was being forged, a land where the ancient and the new coexisted, but not always in harmony. As we reach the end of this chapter, it is imperative to reflect on the implications of Romanization. Andalusia not only became a part of the vast Roman Empire, but also transformed into a meeting point of cultures. However, this process of integration left unanswered questions. How much of indigenous culture was lost to Roman influence? What secrets still lie beneath the surface of the cities that once were the heart of Romanization? As we delve into the next chapter, we find ourselves at a turning point. The fall of the Roman Empire and the arrival of the Visigoths would change the political landscape of Andalusia and usher in a new chapter in the history of the region. If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The structure of Romanization, which had transformed Andalusia into a cultural and administrative mosaic, would soon begin to crumble, with the fall of the Roman Empire at the end of the 5th century. The echo of Roman standards faded, giving way to a new chapter. In this scenario of instability and fragmentation, a new actor emerged on the horizon: the Visigoths. This Germanic people, who had been both enemy and ally of Rome, were preparing to leave their mark on the Andalusian land. The Visigoths, who had crossed the borders of the empire in search of safety and new territories, found refuge and opportunity in the Iberian Peninsula. With the fall of Rome, the prevailing disorder allowed these warriors to settle and organize their own kingdom. In the year 476, with the deposition of the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, the Visigoths established themselves as the new rulers on the peninsula, consolidating their power in the city of Toledo. This period would mark the beginning of a legacy that would change the course of Andalusia. The political and social landscape of this time was complex. The weakness of Roman power had created a vacuum that the Visigoths quickly filled. However, their arrival was not a peaceful process. Internal struggles among the various Germanic tribes and the resistance of the Hispano-Roman populations generated a climate of tension. How would the Visigoths manage to establish a lasting presence in a land that had been until then a Roman stronghold? Among the key figures of this transition was Alaric II, who ruled from 484 to 507. His decision to promulgate the Breviary of Alaric, a compilation of laws aimed at unifying the various peoples under his command, was crucial. This code not only reflected the need for order in a divided territory, but was also an attempt to reconcile Roman traditions with Germanic customs. However, his reign was also marked by opposition from Visigothic nobles and constant struggles with the Franks. As the Visigoths settled, their impact on Andalusian society became evident. The fusion of Visigothic and Hispano-Roman cultures began to give rise to a new identity. The cities, which had mostly thrived under Roman rule, adapted to the new realities. Visigothic architecture, characterized by its basilica-style churches and horseshoe arches, began to flourish, leaving a legacy that would endure in the centuries to come. But what aspects of Roman culture persisted and which were replaced? The decisions of Visigothic leaders regarding administration and religion were also decisive. Converted to Arian Christianity, they promoted a version of the faith that distinguished them from the predominantly Catholic Hispano-Roman population. This religious difference sowed the seeds of discord and created a fracture that would mark Visigothic politics. The influence of the Catholic Church gradually solidified, but the religious division was a constant factor of instability. The development of these events culminated in the Battle of Vuil in 507, where the Visigoths, led by Alaric II, suffered a decisive defeat against the Franks. This defeat not only meant the loss of a large part of their territory in Gaul, but also foreshadowed an uncertain future for their kingdom on the peninsula. The fall of the Visigothic dynasty began to take shape, and Andalusia would not be immune to the repercussions. The instability that followed the battle led to a series of internal conflicts that weakened the cohesion of the kingdom. The short-term effects of these events were notable. The fragmentation of Visigothic power on the peninsula intensified, leading to a series of internal struggles for control. Andalusia, which had once been a prosperous center of culture and trade under Roman rule, faced an uncertain future. Political fragmentation combined with pressure from other peoples left the region vulnerable and exposed to new incursions. The great unknown of this period is undoubtedly the question of how a kingdom that had managed to establish itself so strongly could crumble so quickly. What strategic errors did the Visigoths make? Was their inability to fully unify the populations under their command what led them to ruin? What secrets remain hidden in the shadows of this legacy that still whisper among the ruins of their ancient cities? As the echo of the Visigoths dissipates, the Iberian Peninsula prepares for the next chapter of its history, the arrival of the Muslims and the political and cultural transformation that this would entail. The remnants of Visigothic influence, although hidden, will intertwine with the new currents that will arrive in Andalusia. The instability of the Visigothic kingdom would ultimately transform into a cataclysm, ushering in a new era in the Iberian Peninsula. The echoes of the fall of Visigothic power would resonate through the valleys and mountains of Andalusia, opening the doors to a radical change in its political and cultural fabric. In the year 711, an event of enormous consequences would mark the beginning of the Islamic Conquest, an occurrence that would not only alter the territorial map but also leave an indelible mark on Andalusian identity. The Iberian Peninsula prior to this transformation was a mosaic of Visigothic territories that, although unified under the figure of the king, faced deep internal divisions. The struggles for power among different factions and the weakness of the monarchy paved the way for an invasion. The arrival of the Muslims would occur in a context of instability. However, the true enigma lies in how a relatively small force could unleash such a monumental transformation in such a diverse region. The central figure of the Islamic conquest was Tariq ibn Ziyad, a Berber general who, under the orders of the Umayyad Caliphate, would lead the expedition that would change the fate of Andalusia. Tariq, with the strategic decision to cross the Strait of Gibraltar, which would later bear his name, would become the symbol of a new era. What motivated this leader to embark on such a risky campaign? Perhaps it was the promise of land and wealth, or the desire to expand Islamic influence, but the mystery persists. Was it a mere invasion, or was it perceived as a liberation by some sectors of the oppressed population? On the 19th of July, in the year 711, Muslim troops landed on the Andalusian coast, surprising the disorganized Visigothic forces. In the Battle of Guadalete, Tariq's army faced the Visigothic king Rodrigo, who failed to unite his forces. Rodrigo's defeat signified not only the fall of a king but the beginning of a conquest process that would advance rapidly through the peninsula. Within a matter of years, cities such as Cordoba, Seville, and Granada would fall under Muslim control, transforming the geography and culture of Andalusia. This period of conquest was not only a military advance, it was also a moment of cultural exchange. As the Muslim troops established their authority, they began to introduce knowledge in astronomy, mathematics, and medicine, opening the doors to a cultural flourishing. The blend of Visigothic, Roman, and Muslim traditions created a fertile ground that would give rise to one of the most advanced civilizations of the time. The arrival of the Muslims represented a drastic change in the political structure of Andalusia. The Emirate of Cordoba was established, which would eventually become a caliphate. This new government not only brought with it a more efficient administration, but also fostered an environment of religious tolerance that allowed for the coexistence of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, a phenomenon that left a legacy of knowledge, art, and architecture that still endures in the region. However, this period of splendor was not without its shadows. The peaceful coexistence among the different religious communities would face challenges. And the question that arises is, to what extent would this harmony be lasting? Or would it be merely a fragile balance in a context of latent tensions? The Islamic conquest of Andalusia presents itself as a historical process of great interest. Was it an act of invasion or a liberation? What internal factors within the Visigothic kingdom facilitated such a rapid conquest? The transformation that occurred in the Iberian Peninsula between the 8th and 9th centuries left unanswered questions that continue to resonate in the present. As we delve into the next chapter, the mystery deepens. How would the Caliphate of Córdoba consolidate itself as a beacon of culture and innovation in the Islamic world? The answer will lead us to explore the splendor of a period that would forever change the course of Andalusian history. That transformation would soon manifest its effects. As the Islamic conquest settled on Andalusian soil, the echo of the new era resonated in every corner of the peninsula. By the end of the 8th century, a new order was emerging with the foundation of the Emirate of Córdoba, a milestone that would not only redefine the political geography of the region, but also turn it into a beacon of culture and knowledge in the Islamic world. Culminating later in the Caliphate, the Iberian Peninsula, after the arrival of the Muslims, had undergone a profound transformation. The Visigothic fragmentation had left a power vacuum. In this scenario, Abd al-Rahman I, a member of the Umayyad dynasty who had survived the massacre of his family in Damascus, found in Córdoba the suitable place to establish a new rule. In his mind, the creation of an independent state was not just a political ambition, but a legacy. The decision to proclaim himself emir in the year 756 marked the beginning of a chapter that would seal the fate of Andalusia. As Abd al-Rahman I consolidated his power, his vision extended beyond mere politics. He promoted a new cultural order. His reign was characterized by a policy of pragmatism and integration, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims coexisted. This cultural amalgamation was the perfect breeding ground for the flourishing of the arts, science, and philosophy in Córdoba. The decisions of Abd al-Rahman I, especially his approach to knowledge, laid the foundations of a civilization that would rival the greatest of the time. At the heart of this renaissance was the construction of the Great Mosque of Córdoba, one of the crowning achievements of Islamic architecture. Each arch, each column told a story, a reflection of human ingenuity and spiritual devotion. The mosque was not only a place of prayer, but also a symbol of the power and wealth of the emirate, a space where spirituality intertwined with knowledge. Over time, the arrival of Abdurrahman III, a descendant of Abd al-Rahman I, would further consolidate this tradition of splendor. In the year 929, he proclaimed himself caliph, elevating the status of Al-Andalus to an independent and sovereign power. It was a bold move that not only reinforced his power, but also sent a clear message to the rest of the Islamic world. Córdoba was a center of power, a leader in the political and cultural sphere. Under his command, the city transformed into a melting pot of cultures, where the knowledge of the East and West intertwined. This period of splendor was not without challenges. As the Caliphate of Córdoba prospered, so did internal tensions. The struggle for control of power among the various Muslim factions and rivalries with the Christian kingdoms of the north began to leave marks on the stability of the Caliphate. However, these conflicts did not manage to overshadow the light emanating from Córdoba. Centers of knowledge such as the Library of Al-Hakam II flourished, and its legacy would endure through the centuries. The short-term effects of this golden age were palpable. Córdoba became a center of attraction not only for Muslims, but for scholars and travelers from all over the world. The influence of the Caliphate extended beyond its borders. Innovations in mathematics, medicine, and astronomy were being developed in its schools, and the echo of philosophical discussions reverberated in the streets. Was it possible that this city, at its peak, had been the meeting point of some of the brightest minds of its time? Yet the mystery of the Caliphate of Córdoba persists. As power seemed unbreakable, cracks in its structure began to show. Sectarian tensions and internal political struggles sowed the seeds of future fragmentation. How could such a brilliant kingdom fall into disintegration? What decisions led to its eventual decline? As shadows began to lengthen over the caliphate, the path toward its fragmentation was quietly being drawn, preparing the ground for the emergence of the kingdoms of Taifas. The history of Andalusia, rich in nuances and unexpected turns, would continue to reveal its secrets. The light of Cordoba, although bright, would face the test of time, leaving in its wake a legacy that would resonate through the centuries. The next chapter will explore the peak of Al-Andalus, a period of splendor that would transform not only Andalusia, but all of Europe. The consolidation of power and culture in the Caliphate of Córdoba would soon reach its peak, revealing a period where Al-Andalus became a beacon of knowledge, art, and commerce in the medieval world. In the 10th century, the Iberian Peninsula, under Muslim rule, flourished in an environment that fostered the exchange of ideas and the development of a unique cultural identity. We explore the splendor of Al-Andalus at its height, a phenomenon that not only transformed the region but also left an indelible legacy in the history of Europe. At the beginning of this period, the political and social situation of Al-Andalus was complex. Following the unification under the Caliphate of Córdoba, the territory experienced an economic and cultural boom that rivaled the greatest cities of the time, such as Baghdad and Constantinople. Under the leadership of Caliph Abd al-Rahman III, who ruled from 912 to 961, the Caliphate reached an unprecedented level of development. The policy of religious tolerance and the promotion of trade established an atmosphere conducive to the flourishing of the arts and sciences. Abd al-Rahman III, a leader with a clear vision of expansion and consolidation, sought not only to strengthen his power but also to project the greatness of his caliphate. The construction of the palatial city of Medina Azahara, an architectural testament of the era, symbolizes this quest for splendor. What decisions led Abd al-Rahman to invest so much in architecture and culture? The answer lies in his desire to legitimize his reign. The grandeur of his constructions not only provided a space for governance, but also a meeting place for scholars, poets, and merchants. The development of Al-Andalus was not limited to the political sphere. The creation of schools and libraries, such as the famous Library of Al-Hakam II in Córdoba, fostered an environment where science and philosophy flourished. Philosophers and scientists such as Averroes and Maimonides would become renowned figures, whose ideas crossed borders and left an indelible mark on European thought. Alchemy, medicine, mathematics, and astronomy developed with a fervor that challenged the limitations of the time. Trade also played a fundamental role in the peak of Al-Andalus. The trade routes that crossed the Mediterranean connected the region with North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. The exchange of goods from spices to silk not only enriched the Andalusian elites but also facilitated cultural exchange. The markets of cities such as Seville and Córdoba became nerve centers where ideas and customs intersected. The question is, who were the main beneficiaries of this prosperity? As the economy grew, so did the population. The Andalusian cities expanded, becoming vibrant urban centers filled with life and diversity. The coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, although not without tensions, created a unique environment that fostered cultural exchange. Festivals and celebrations became occasions to share traditions and knowledge. However, this apparent harmony concealed latent conflicts. What forces were at play beneath the surface of this cultural interrelation? The splendor of Al-Andalus at its height is reflected not only in its cultural achievements but also in its political influence. Through alliances and conquests, the Andalusian leaders extended their reach. However, this growth was not without challenges. Rivalry with other powers, both Christian and Muslim, began to manifest, and the decisions made by the rulers of Al-Andalus would have repercussions. Could their ambition have sown the seed of their own fragmentation? At the end of this period of splendor, the echo of the greatness of Al-Andalus resonated strongly in the world. Innovations in agriculture, engineering, and medicine laid the foundations of a legacy that would endure. However, success also led to rivalry, both within and outside the borders of the Caliphate. The fragmentation into kingdoms of Taifas loomed, bringing with it a new era of conflicts. Was this the inevitable fate of such a rich and diverse culture? The peak of Al-Andalus became a historical period of great interest, where knowledge and culture reached a climax, but also where tensions began to brew. The question that lingers is, could there have been an alternative path for Al-Andalus? One that would have perpetuated its legacy of unity and prosperity. As we delve into the next chapter, we will confront the consequences of this splendor. The division of the Caliphate of Córdoba into small kingdoms of Taifas not only marked a change in the political landscape, but also transformed the delicate cultural balance forged over centuries. The era of splendor, where the Caliphate of Córdoba shone with an almost unparalleled light in the medieval world, would soon fade, leaving behind a legacy of fragmentation. The arrival of the 11th century marked the beginning of a drastic transformation in the political and social landscape of Al-Andalus. The unity and power that once characterized the Caliphate crumbled, giving way to a series of small kingdoms known as Taifas, a phenomenon that would trigger a series of events with lasting repercussions. The fragmentation of the Caliphate of Córdoba was not an isolated event, but rather the result of a series of interconnected factors. In its final years, the Caliphate had begun to show signs of internal weakness. Power struggles among factions, the growing influence of local elites, and a weakening of central authority. In the face of this instability, the governors and leaders who once acted under the command of the Caliph began to assert their autonomy, sowing the seeds of dissolution. Among the most relevant actors in this transformation was the last great Caliph, Hisham II, who, unable to control the growing ambitions of his nobles, became a figure without real power. The viziers, such as Al-Mansur, who had exercised almost absolute power, were stripped of their influence after his death, leaving a power vacuum that was quickly filled by regional leaders. This vacuum became a battleground of ideological dispute, where the principles of authority and loyalty were called into question. The process of fragmentation accelerated after the death of Al-Mansur in 1002, when the Caliphate divided into multiple kingdoms of Taifas that were, in essence, small independent states. Each Taifa was governed by a local leader seeking to consolidate their power. Among the most prominent were the kingdoms of Seville, Granada, Toledo, and Badajoz, each striving to stand out in a chaotic political landscape. To what extent did this quest for autonomy reflect personal ambition or an attempt to preserve the culture of a civilization in decline? As the kingdoms of Taifas emerged, so did a new form of rivalry. Old alliances were broken and conflicts between Taifas became common. Territorial disputes and power struggles led to an environment of shifting alliances where long-term loyalty was rare. This tumultuous landscape affected not only the leaders, but also the population, who found themselves caught in the midst of the conflicts. However, this fragmentation also brought about a cultural and scientific resurgence. In a context of competition, the Taifas began to flourish in terms of art, literature, and science. Each kingdom sought to demonstrate its greatness through culture, leading to an era of splendor that, although fleeting, left a lasting legacy. Poets, philosophers, and scientists moved from one Taifa to another, creating a melting pot of ideas. Could culture truly flourish amidst a fragmentation that threatened to disintegrate the Andalusian legacy? The initial impact of fragmentation was profound. The kingdoms of Taifas, although culturally vibrant, became vulnerable to the growing pressure from the Christian kingdoms of the north. The political weakness of Al-Andalus became an invitation to conquest, and the Christian kingdoms saw in this fragmentation an opportunity. Christian victories began to accumulate, and with each loss, the shadow of a possible reconquest loomed larger over the peninsula. The great unknown of this era lies in the duality of fragmentation. Was it a failure that led to the eventual fall of Al-Andalus, or was it a period of cultural renaissance that left an indelible mark? As the kingdoms of Taifas fought for their existence, the history of Andalusia became more complex. But amidst this turbulence, one question persisted: could Al-Andalus survive the fragmentation it had generated? With the increasingly palpable threat of the Christian kingdoms, the next chapter will focus on how these conflicts gave rise to the Reconquista, a process intertwined with the identity and memory of a past that still resonated in the lands of Andalusia. The echo of the fragmentation of the kingdoms of Taifas would become the prelude to a new chapter. The crisis of fragmentation of the kingdoms of Taifas soon became a catalyst for the ambition of their neighbours. While the Iberian Peninsula wore itself down in internal struggles, a new fervour began to stir in the Christian kingdoms of the north. The Reconquista advanced, driven by a strong impulse to reclaim what they considered part of their legacy. As the Christian kingdoms, particularly Castile, Leon and Aragon, set their sights on Andalusia, the political and social environment grew increasingly complex. In the 11th century, the splendor of Al-Andalus was overshadowed by the fragmentation into small kingdoms of Taifas, which, although rich in culture, were vulnerable. The internal instability of these kingdoms was a perfect breeding ground for the ambitions of the Christian kingdoms, which saw in the Reconquista not only a matter of faith, but also an opportunity for territorial expansion. From the lands of Castile to the plateaus of Leon, the echo of war resonated, and the leaders of these kingdoms began to devise plans that would change the course of history. Among the most prominent figures of this period was King Alfonso VI of Leon and Castile, a monarch who emerged as a central figure in the struggle against the Muslims. Known for his ability to forge alliances, Alfonso VI understood that victory over the kingdoms of Taifas would mean the restoration of Christian power on the peninsula. In the year 1085, his decision to besiege Toledo, a Muslim stronghold, would mark a turning point. His army besieged the city with determination, and after months of siege, Toledo fell into Christian hands. This triumph was a symbol of hope for the Christian kingdoms. However, the victory in Toledo brought unexpected consequences. The fall of the city strengthened Muslim resistance as other kingdoms of Taifas sought support from North Africa. The arrival of the Almoravids, a Berber dynasty that crossed the Strait of Gibraltar, represented a new challenge. The Almoravids, with their religious fervour and well-organised army, reignited the struggle. Thus, the Reconquista became a game of chess, where each move could be decisive. As the years progressed, the Reconquista intensified. In the year 1094, the knight Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar, known as El Cid, became an emblematic figure. His skill in combat and political cunning allowed him to alternate between loyalties, fighting for both Christian kings and Muslim lords. The exploits of El Cid became legends, symbolizing the complexity of loyalties in a time of war. In the year 1108, the Battle of Sagrajas became a crucial milestone. The Christian forces, led by Alfonso VI, faced the Almoravids in a fierce combat. Despite the bravery shown by the Christians, victory went to the Muslims, who knew how to use their knowledge of the terrain to thwart Alfonso's plans. The consequences of this defeat were notable. The morale of the Christian kingdoms was affected, and the sense of invulnerability they had experienced after the conquest of Toledo faded. Over time, the Reconquista transformed into a long and exhausting conflict. Each victory and each defeat shaped not only the fate of the peninsula, but also that of its inhabitants. The tensions were not limited to the borders between Muslims and Christians. They also extended to the Jewish communities, which, caught in the midst of this conflict, became a target of growing intolerance. In this context, the perception of Andalusian identity began to be a mystery, a crossroads of cultures. The great unknown of the Reconquista lies in the question: what truly motivated the Christians to continue their struggle? Was it faith, the desire to reclaim lost glory, or perhaps the ambition for power and wealth? As the Christian kingdoms advanced, the landscape of Andalusia turned into a battlefield, where every stone told a story of resistance and ambition. The campaigns of the Christian kingdoms not only left a legacy of conquest, but also sowed the seeds of profound cultural change. The blending of traditions and knowledge began to shape a new identity in the south of the peninsula. What secrets did the territories that were once part of Al-Andalus hold as the Reconquista progressed? The gaze of the Christian kingdoms focused on Granada, the last Muslim stronghold. The struggle for Andalusia would become, in its final stages, a testament to resistance and desperation. The history of the Reconquista is, ultimately, a story of human ambition and the struggle for territorial control, leaving behind a trail of secrets and mysteries that still await revelation. The Christian advance would open the doors to a new chapter in the history of Andalusia, where resistance and ingenuity would manifest in a kingdom that would endure as a symbol of an era of splendor and challenge. In the heart of the Iberian Peninsula, the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada emerged as the last bastion of Islam on Spanish soil, an enclave that, despite adversities, flourished in an environment rich in culture and innovations. As the 13th century approached its end, the peninsula found itself immersed in a turbulent transformation. The Reconquista was intensifying. The Christian kingdoms, increasingly organized, advanced with the firm intention of reclaiming the lands that had once been part of their legacy. At this juncture, the Nasrid dynasty, which had taken control of Granada in 1238 under the leadership of Ibn al-Ahmar, faced a crucial dilemma: how to preserve its autonomy and culture in a world that seemed determined to erase it from the map. Under the command of the Nasrids, Granada became a center of trade, science, and art, where the influence of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish cultures intertwined. The Alhambra, its most emblematic fortress, stood as a testament to the advanced architectural development of the time, with its intricate details and gardens. However, the cultural legacy of the Nasrid kingdom was not limited to its architecture. Poetry, music, and philosophical thought flourished, driven by figures such as the poet Ibn Zamrak, whose works would resonate throughout history. In this cultural framework, the political decisions of the Nasrid monarchs played a crucial role. Yusuf I, who ruled from 1333 to 1354, sought to consolidate Nasrid power through strategic alliances with the Christian kingdoms and diplomacy, while his successor, Muhammad V, distinguished himself by his military approach and his desire to maintain independence in the face of constant pressure from Castile and Aragon. However, his reign was not without challenges, including internal revolts and betrayals. The development of these events was a complex game of political chess, where each move could mean salvation or condemnation. The Battle of the Vega de Granada in 1319, for example, marked a turning point as the Nasrids achieved a decisive victory against the Castilians. This triumph, however, did not eliminate the imminent threat, but transformed it, turning the kingdom into an even more coveted target for its enemies. As the 15th century progressed, the echo of the Reconquista resonated ever louder. The campaigns of the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella intensified, and Granada found itself in their sights. The diplomatic relations, once so careful, began to crumble, and uncertainty took hold of the Nasrid court. Could a kingdom as emblematic as Granada withstand the inexorable advance of Christian forces? The question hung in the air. The consequences of these events were profound. The Nasrid kingdom, which had been a beacon of cultural diversity, began to lose its cohesion. Internal tensions grew, and power struggles among noble factions weakened the kingdom. The lament of the poets who once celebrated its splendor turned into an elegy for an uncertain future. Thus, the mystery of the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada presents itself before us. How is it possible that such a vibrant and culturally rich kingdom fell under the pressure of external forces and internal divisions? The history of Granada is a reminder that resistance does not always guarantee survival, and that the passage of time can blur even the brightest legacies. In the year 1492, the fate of Granada would be sealed, but the echo of its history would endure in the heart of Andalusia. The fall of the kingdom would signify the end of one chapter, but also the beginning of another, where the legacy of Nasrid culture would intertwine with the new Christian order. The question that arises is, What secrets still lie in the depths of the Alhambra? As the troops of the Catholic monarchs prepared to besiege the city, the next chapter of this story of resistance and legacy would unfold, marking the end of an era and the beginning of a new destiny for Andalusia. That resistance, which had endured through the centuries, was about to face its most decisive challenge. The shadow of the Reconquista loomed over the last Muslim stronghold in the Iberian Peninsula, the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada. In the year 1492, the echo of bells resonated in Christian cities, marking the end of a tumultuous period. The fall of Granada not only signified the culmination of a conflict that had marked the history of Andalusia, but it also revealed an enigma that would endure through time. What secrets and legacies lie hidden behind the conquest of this last refuge of Islamic culture in Europe? The historical context preceding the fall of Granada is complex. After centuries of confrontations, the Reconquista had advanced relentlessly. The Catholic monarchs, Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, had unified their kingdoms and consolidated a power that extended over much of the peninsula. In this climate, the situation in Granada became increasingly precarious. Despite being the last bastion of Muslim rule, the Nasrid kingdom faced internal and external tensions. The arrival of the Catholic monarchs, determined to bring the Reconquista to an end, would mark the beginning of the end. The main actors in this historical process are figures who have left an indelible mark. The Catholic monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand, were not merely monarchs. They were strategists who saw in the conquest of Granada an opportunity to consolidate their power. On the other side, the last Nasrid Sultan, Boabdil, found himself caught between despair and the desire to preserve his legacy. The decisions made by these characters were crucial. Boabdil, faced with the possibility of surrender, grappled between resistance and acceptance of a fate that seemed inevitable. The unfolding of events that led to the fall of Granada is a tale of sieges, battles, and negotiations. In April of 1491, Christian troops began the siege of the city. The Alhambra, a symbol of Nasrid grandeur, stood imposing, but its strength began to wane. For months, the Christians surrounded the city, cutting off its supplies. The resistance of the Granadans was fierce, but as time passed, the situation became desperate. The echoes of war resonated in the streets of Granada, where hunger and hopelessness began to ravage its people. Finally, on the 2nd of January in the year 1492, after months of siege, Boabdil was forced to capitulate. The surrender of Granada marked the end of the Reconquista, but it also left unanswered questions. Was it an inevitable defeat, or were there missed opportunities that could have changed the course of history? Boabdil's surrender not only meant the loss of a kingdom, but also the fading of a cultural and artistic era that had flourished for centuries in Al-Andalus. The immediate consequences of the fall of Granada were profound. The city was incorporated into the Crown of Castile, a process that transformed the geopolitics of the peninsula and its cultural mosaic. The promises of tolerance made during the capitulation soon faded, giving way to a systematic persecution of the Muslims and Jews who inhabited the region. The echo of war transformed into the lament of a people witnessing the erosion of their identity. The Inquisition, established shortly thereafter, would become an instrument of control and cultural homogenization. However, the enigma surrounding the conquest of Granada does not end here. The fall of a kingdom implies the loss of its legacy, but it also raises the question of what secrets lie behind its walls, what knowledge, what culture, and what history were lost in the silence of surrender. The echoes of history invite us to reflect on a conquest that, although seemingly definitive, left behind a trail of mysteries that still await revelation. As we delve into the next chapter, where we will explore the era of the Catholic monarchs, it is important to remember that the history of Andalusia did not end with the fall of Granada. On the contrary, it was a new beginning, a transformation that ushered in a period of unification and reforms that would change the course of its history. What changes awaited in the shadow of the newly conquered Alhambra? If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The fall of Granada in 1492 not only marked the end of a kingdom, but also unleashed a series of transformations that would extend throughout the Iberian Peninsula. The unification of Spain under the Catholic monarchs, Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon, presented itself as a new dawn, albeit with shadows looming over the future. This chapter delves into the era of the Catholic monarchs, a period in which Andalusia, the epicenter of the Reconquista, would undergo a series of reforms that would shape its identity. In the historical context, the Iberian Peninsula was in a state of effervescence. The Reconquista had been a long and exhausting process. The fall of Granada symbolized the culmination of this struggle, but also the urgent need to consolidate power in a fragmented country. The unification under the Catholic monarchs was not merely a matter of territorial power, but a profound strategy to create a national identity that transcended the differences between kingdoms. Isabella and Ferdinand, upon being crowned as Catholic monarchs, made key decisions that would profoundly impact Andalusia. Their shared vision of a unified and Catholic Spain led to the implementation of policies aimed at homogenizing cultural and religious diversity. The Alhambra, a symbol of Nasrid splendor, would transform into a symbol of the new order. Religious reform was one of their first actions, culminating in the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, an event with profound and negative consequences for the Jewish community and for society as a whole. As these events unfolded, the influence of the Catholic monarchs extended beyond politics into the economy and culture. With the intention of revitalizing Andalusia, agrarian and commercial reforms were promoted. The roads and ports of Andalusia, vital for trade in the Mediterranean, received renewed attention. However, this modernization brought with it growing inequality, where local elites benefited while peasants and the lower classes remained in the shadows of prosperity. The question that arises is, who truly benefited from these reforms, and at what cost? In this context of change, the figure of Christopher Columbus emerged as a symbol of exploration. The Catholic monarchs, eager to expand their influence, sponsored his journey into the unknown in search of new trade routes. The discovery of America in 1492 would not only transform the history of Spain, but also have repercussions in Andalusia, which would become the departure port of the new colonial era. However, this expansion would bring with it a new enigma. How would the arrival of wealth from the New World affect the Andalusian economy and its social structure? As the new Spain consolidated, the impact of the decisions made by the Catholic monarchs began to become evident. The unification of Spain brought with it a centralization of power that limited the autonomy of local kingdoms, including Andalusia. Tensions between the crown and local elites began to brew. Furthermore, the expulsion of the Jews and the forced conversion of many Muslims generated an atmosphere of distrust and resentment, creating a legacy of division that would endure over time. The enigma surrounding the era of the Catholic monarchs in Andalusia is not limited to political and economic decisions. In the backdrop of these reforms lies the struggle for cultural identity. Andalusia, with its rich Muslim heritage, faced the pressure of a homogenization that sought to erase the traces of its past. The cultural wealth of the Moriscos, those Muslim communities that remained on the peninsula, was threatened by intolerance and repression. To what extent can a national identity be forged at the expense of its diversity? With these questions resonating in the air, the era of the Catholic monarchs presents itself as a period of unification, but also of complexities and contradictions. In the following chapter, we will explore the Golden Age of Andalusia, a period that, despite the shadows of the past, would flourish in a cultural and artistic splendor that would resonate throughout history. The unification of the kingdoms would give way to an era of remarkable splendor in Andalusia. The Golden Age of Andalusia, which spans from the late 15th century to the 17th, stands as a period in which culture and art flourished in a context of abundance and transformation. The fall of the Nasrid Kingdom of Granada in 1492 marked the end of one chapter, but also the beginning of a new legacy. During this period, Andalusia became the epicenter of a cultural and artistic renaissance, where the influences of various traditions intertwined. The arrival of the Catholic monarchs, Isabel and Fernando, not only politically unified the peninsula, but also fostered an environment for the development of the arts and letters. This new political order allowed the Andalusian nobility, now with renewed power, to begin sponsoring artists, writers, and architects. In this context, figures such as the painter Francisco de Herrera and the playwright Lope de Vega emerged, leaving an indelible mark on Spanish culture. What motivations drove these patrons to invest in local talent? Architecture, another of the pillars of this period, underwent radical transformation. The mudéjar, Gothic and Renaissance styles amalgamated, giving rise to works of great architectural value that endure to this day. The Giralda of Seville, an ancient minaret that stands as a symbol of the city, is just one example of this fusion. The construction of the Seville Cathedral, with its grand Renaissance design, also speaks of an intention to showcase the power and wealth that emanated from this land. At the same time, Andalusian literature reached new heights of recognition. The Song of Songs and the works of poets such as Luis de Góngora and Fray Luis de León resonated in European courts. Their lyricism, rich in imagery and symbolism, captured the essence of an Andalusia that was grappling between tradition and modernity. The gathering spaces of the time became forums for discussion, where ideas flourished and were intensely debated. But amid this literary effervescence, how many voices were silenced? However, the Golden Age was not only characterized by its cultural splendor, it also witnessed tensions and conflicts. The Inquisition, fervently established during this period, became a shadow that loomed over dissenters. The converts, those who had adopted Christianity after the Reconquista, found themselves at a crossroads. Despite their contributions to art and culture, many lived with the constant fear of being persecuted. Was this repression a price that Andalusian culture had to pay for its splendor? As the 17th century progressed, the Andalusian economy was marked by the exploitation of resources and the influence of trade with America. Seville became the main port of entry for riches brought from the New World. Gold and silver fueled a dynamic economy, but also contributed to the decline of certain productive sectors and the rise of corruption. The great merchants and bankers of the time benefited enormously, often at the expense of the needs of the general population. The echo of this golden age of Andalusia still resonates today, but its end was unforeseen. The combination of excesses, conflicts, and the arrival of new powers began to blur the achievements made. The lights that had shone brightly began to dim, giving way to a period of decline that would not only affect Andalusia, but all of Spain. What real legacy did this period of splendor leave? Were the cultural achievements sufficient to sustain a society that was beginning to crumble, as the enigma of decline looms over the end of this golden age? The next chapter of our history takes us to explore the role of this region in the New World, a journey that promised riches but would also bring unforeseen challenges. The history of Andalusia transforms, expands, and intertwines with the currents of a world yet to be discovered. The struggle for control of the peninsula not only defined the destiny of Andalusia, but also positioned it as a strategic point at a crucial moment, the moment when the unified kingdoms of Spain would look beyond their borders. The echo of the Reconquista resonated in the collective imagination of the Andalusians, while the air was filled with ideas of expansion, adventure, and for some, gold. In this context, Andalusia would become the gateway to a new world. The arrival of Christopher Columbus on the shores of America in 1492 was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of a period of intense exploration and ambition. The city of Seville stood as the financial and commercial heart of the new colonial enterprise. Its port, the most important in the peninsula, transformed into the epicenter of a trade that would unite Europe and America. How did a region marked by cultural diversity become the engine of the colonization of the New World? In the years leading up to Columbus's voyage, various figures played a key role. Isabella I of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon. The Catholic monarchs not only unified the country but also promoted exploration as a way to expand their influence. In Seville, the fervor for exploration mingled with the ambition of merchants and nobles who saw in America an opportunity to amass fortune. The creation of the House of Trade in 1503, which regulated trade and navigation to America, was a decisive step. This organization controlled trade and was responsible for the training of navigators and explorers, many of whom were Andalusians. The protagonists of this story are numerous. Alongside Columbus, other Andalusian explorers ventured into the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Among them were figures such as Juan Ponce de León, who would explore Florida, and Hernán Cortés, the conqueror of Mexico. The latter, originally from Medellin in present-day Extremadura, but with strong ties to Andalusia, distinguished himself by his conquest of the Aztec Empire. The decisions of these men, driven by ambition, would mark the fate of millions in the lands they encountered. The development of these events was not a straightforward path. In 1492, when Columbus arrived in the Bahamas, news of his discoveries began to reach Seville, unleashing a wave of interest. In the following years, expeditions and conquests followed one another, leading to a rapid colonization of vast stretches of land. But alongside the desire for conquest, the shadows of exploitation also emerged. The riches brought by the conquerors, often obtained through violence, had a profound impact on indigenous cultures. What was the true cost of this quest for wealth and power? The immediate consequences of this era of exploration were profound. Andalusia, with its port of Seville as the nerve center, greatly benefited from trade with America. Wealth flowed into the peninsula, enriching the nobility and the emerging Andalusian bourgeoisie, but also generating social and economic tensions. Andalusian cities such as Cordoba and Granada experienced an economic renaissance, but at the same time, the impact of conquest generated a moral and ethical dilemma that would resonate through the centuries. The great unknown of this chapter is deep. The participation of Andalusia in the exploration and colonization of the New World left a legacy that endures, but how to reconcile the achievements with the shadow of oppression exercised over the indigenous peoples? The accumulated wealth and cultural exchange intertwine with the history of suffering and resistance of those who inhabited the American lands. As we delve into the next chapter, we will confront a period of crisis in Andalusia, where the euphoria of conquest would turn into decline. The wealth that had flowed into the peninsula did not always bring prosperity. The shadow of the empire would begin to fade, and with it new questions would arise about the future of an Andalusia marked by splendor and tragedy. The initial prosperity would soon reveal its limits, giving way to one of the darkest stages in Andalusian history. As the golden century faded, the echo of previous splendor became increasingly distant, and Andalusia, one of the most prosperous regions of the Spanish Empire, found itself on the brink of an economic and social abyss. The decline of the empire affected not only the great cities but also resonated in the lives of its inhabitants, who faced an increasingly harsh reality. The impending crisis was not an isolated phenomenon, but the result of a series of political and economic decisions that dated back to the last decades of the 16th century. The arrival of new monarchs such as Philip III and Philip IV brought with it a series of policies that, instead of bringing stability, plunged the empire into a state of inefficiency and corruption. The bureaucracy became cumbersome, and favoritism at court relegated the most competent. Thus, resources flowed into the coffers of a few, while the majority of the population, especially in Andalusia, began to experience widespread impoverishment. In this bleak landscape, the Andalusian nobility became a key player. In their eagerness to maintain their privileges, they began to concentrate land and wealth, leaving peasants and workers in an alarming state of precariousness. The great lords, such as the Duke of Alcala or the Marquis of Tarifa, dedicated themselves to maximizing their profits. This disconnection between the elite and the common people intensified, creating a breeding ground for discontent. The development of events that led to the decline of the empire in Andalusia can be traced through a series of crises. The first was the agrarian crisis, which became evident at the end of the 17th century when harvests began to fail. The combination of droughts, plagues, and an obsolete agricultural system hit the peasants hard. This was compounded by the increase in taxes, which made survival for the lower classes even more difficult. The situation became even more critical with the arrival of war at the borders of the empire. European conflicts such as the 30 Years' War demanded immense resources, diverting the administration's attention to distant conflicts. Andalusia began to lose its international relevance. The trade routes that once fed the Andalusian cities were interrupted, and trade with the American colonies became uncertain. The fleets crossing the Atlantic began to arrive with fewer treasures, and the promise of wealth faded. In the midst of this storm, figures such as the Count Duke of Olivares, favourite of Philip IV, attempted to implement reforms that promised to revitalize the economy. However, their efforts were thwarted by the resistance of local nobles who saw their privileges threatened. The lack of unity among the different social estates became an insurmountable obstacle. Thus, each attempt at reform was met with distrust. The immediate consequence of this chaos was the emergence of outbreaks of violence and uprisings in various regions of Andalusia. Peasant uprisings such as that of the Men of the Land in 1641 reflected deep social discontent. These movements, although disorganized, revealed a spark of resistance. However, the repression by the authorities was severe. Government responses, far from bringing solutions, intensified the desperation of the people. The decline of the Spanish Empire in Andalusia left a historical enigma. How could a region that had been the center of so much splendor fall into a spiral of misery? The answer lies in the complexity of class relations, the impact of political decisions, and a series of accumulated errors. The history of Andalusia in this sense becomes a mirror reflecting the ups and downs of an empire that failed to adapt to changes. The echoes of this decline resonate even today. The struggle for survival and the quest for justice are themes that remain alive in the collective memory of Andalusia. However, as the shadows of this chapter dissipate, new conflicts emerge on the horizon. The War of Spanish Succession is just around the corner, and its impact on the region promises to be even deeper. The weakness of the empire would evolve into a conflict that would transform the political map of Spain. The War of Spanish Succession, a confrontation that extended from 2001 to 2014, not only shook the foundations of the monarchy, but also left deep echoes in Andalusian society. In this chapter, we will unravel the impact of this war on Andalusia and the political changes that arose from its ashes. At the beginning of the 18th century, Europe was in a state of tension. The death without heirs of King Charles II of Spain unleashed a struggle for the throne that involved the major powers. The crowns of France and Spain were threatened by the possibility of a dynastic union under the control of Philip of Anjou, grandson of Louis XIV of France. This fact provoked the fear that French supremacy in Europe would be consolidated, leading a coalition of countries, including England, the Netherlands, and Austria, to form an alliance against France and Spain. In this scenario, Andalusia, with its strategic position, became a chessboard. The main actors of this conflict were figures such as Philip of Anjou, who became Philip V, and Archduke Charles of Austria, who claimed the Spanish throne as Charles III. The decisions of these leaders would be crucial. Philip V, determined to consolidate his power, implemented reforms to strengthen the monarchy and centralize the government, while his opponents promoted a more decentralized model in Andalusia. This struggle translated into a series of confrontations. The early years of the conflict witnessed an outbreak of violence in the Andalusian cities. The city of Seville, a stronghold of support for Archduke Charles, became a center of resistance, In 2004, Anglo-Dutch troops, allies of the Archduke, landed on the Andalusian coast. However, the reaction was not uniform. Some cities, such as Cadiz, aligned with the new king, while others showed loyalty to Philip V. This internal division became a breeding ground for violence. As the war progressed, the consequences for the civilian population worsened. The siege of various Andalusian cities led to a severe supply crisis, and hunger echoed in the streets. The decisions of military leaders such as Field Marshal Francisco de Velasco, who defended Cadiz against the Allied forces, became local legends but also reminders of the losses suffered. The decisive battle took place in 2010 in the town of Villaviciosa, where the forces of Philip V achieved a crucial victory. This defeat for the Allies marked a turning point. However, the war not only left a legacy of destruction, but also raised questions about the future of the monarchy. The victory of Philip V led to the consolidation of his power, but also to the implementation of the new plant decrees, which abolished the fueros and privileges of the kingdoms, including Andalusia. These reforms, although seeking greater centralization, also sowed a resentment that would endure. The immediate consequences of the war were felt in every corner of Andalusia. The loss of lives, hunger, and economic devastation led to a crisis that would affect the social structure. The local elites who had supported one side or the other were forced to adapt to a new political order. The centralization of power in Madrid meant that decisions affecting Andalusia would no longer be made from its own territory. Despite these changes, the great unknown of the chapter presents itself in the form of a question. Was the victory of Philip V truly a definitive solution, or rather the beginning of a cycle of resistance and adaptation that would continue to shape Andalusian identity? While the Bourbon Reforms promised to modernize Spain, the shadow of the war would continue to weigh on the region. The War of Spanish Succession marked a before and after in the history of Andalusia. The impact of this conflict not only altered the political landscape, but also left a profound mark on the collective consciousness. The echoes of the war would resonate over time, preparing us to explore the Bourbon reforms that would follow. The resolution of the war would give way to a new order. At the beginning of the 18th century, Andalusia found itself in a state of uncertainty, marked by the echoes of the War of Succession and the shadows of a faltering economy. In this context, the Bourbons, a dynasty from France, ascended to the throne of Spain, bringing with them an ambitious reform project that promised to transform not only the heart of the country but also the very core of Andalusia. The Bourbon Reforms stand out as a process of great historical interest in Andalusian history. The arrival of Philip V in 1700 marked the beginning of a period of modernization that sought to revitalize a kingdom that seemed to have lost its way. But what truly motivated the crown to implement such a series of radical changes? The political landscape of the time was complex. After the war, Spain found itself in a vulnerable position. European powers were in constant competition, and the need to reform the state apparatus became urgent. Thus, the Bourbons, with their eyes set on centralization and modernization, began to dismantle the old structures that kept Andalusia in a state of semi-autonomy. The Andalusian administration, characterized by corruption and inefficiency, needed a radical change. In this scenario, key figures emerged. One of them was the Count of Floridablanca, who, as minister to Charles III, became an architect of reformist policy. His vision of a more efficient state materialized in the creation of new institutions and in the promotion of agriculture and industry, seeking to give a new impetus to the Andalusian economy. But were all the actors in agreement with this change? The answer is no. The reforms, although well-intentioned, faced resistance from local elites who saw these changes as a threat to their power and privileges. Social tensions began to surface, revealing a landscape of discontent looming over the working class and peasants. The imposition of new rates and taxes under the pretext of modernizing the economy generated a climate of unrest. The unfolding of events turned into a tension between modernity and tradition, between centralization and localism. The initial impact of these reforms was palpable. The creation of the intendancies, which divided the Andalusian territory into administrative districts, sought a more effective control of tax collection. Likewise, the promotion of commercial crops such as wine and olives, along with the construction of new infrastructures, promised to revitalize the economy. However, the reality was more complex. Many peasants found themselves trapped in a cycle of debt, and resistance to the new taxes generated uprisings that challenged Bourbon authority. The great unknown of this period is clear. Were the Bourbon reforms truly a step towards modernization, or rather a way to consolidate central power at the expense of local freedoms? The history of Andalusia, in its quest for identity and autonomy, became ensnared in this web of ambitions and discontent. As the reforms progressed, the echoes of resistance resonated louder. The pressure from local elites and popular opposition began to generate a tension that would culminate in a period of agitation. The Bourbon reforms, although initially driven by the illusion of a new dawn, left a legacy that is still felt: the struggle between central power and local aspirations. In this way, 18th century Andalusia became an ideological battleground. While the crown sought to establish tighter control, the Andalusians, with their rich history of resistance, would not remain idle. In this context, the question arises that leads us to the next chapter. How would Andalusia respond to the growing agitation that would mark the 19th century? The accumulated tension would transform into a storm of social and political unrest across the vast expanse of Andalusia during the 19th century. In this corner of the world where the echo of history resonates strongly, the divisions that had accumulated over decades would finally find their outlet. The Spanish War of Independence, which would erupt in 2008, would not only mark a turning point in the fate of Spain, but would also leave a profound imprint on the identity of Andalusia. At the beginning of the 19th century, Andalusia found itself at a crossroads. Deep social inequalities, exacerbated by the inefficiency of the feudal system and the control of the landowning elites, created a fertile ground for insurrection. The shadow of the Inquisition still lingered, and the Andalusian people, weary of oppression, began to raise their voices. The key figures of this era would soon emerge. Among them was the painter Francisco de Goya, whose works became a critical testimony against war and barbarism. However, it was the people themselves who took up arms, inspiring figures like the guerrilla fighter Juan Martín Díaz, known as El Empecinado. This popular leader, with his cunning and bravery, would become a symbol of resistance against the French invader. The conflict began when Napoleon's troops crossed the Pyrenees, with the ambition of conquering Spain. In Andalusia, this invasion was perceived as a direct affront to the identity and sovereignty of the people. Defense councils were formed in cities like Seville and Cadiz, where the decisions of local leaders became crucial. In Cadiz, the convening of the Cortes in 1810 would mark the beginning of the search for a new Spain, where the first constitution of 1812, known as La Pepa, would be proposed. A document that promised freedom and equality, but also raised questions. Events spiraled into a whirlwind of struggle and sacrifice. The Andalusian guerrillas, in their fight against Napoleon's troops, carried out acts of resistance that defied the logic of conventional warfare. In every battle, in every ambush, the determination of a people who refused to be subjugated was palpable. However, the path to freedom was fraught with shadows. Internal struggles and the lack of unity among the different sectors of the nationalist movement complicated the situation. The immediate consequences of the War of Independence were devastating for Andalusia. Infrastructure was destroyed, and the already weakened economy plunged into chaos. Agriculture, a fundamental pillar of the Andalusian economy, suffered a severe blow. Instability brought hunger and misery, and the local elites, unable to offer solutions, watched their power crumble. Andalusia found itself trapped in a labyrinth of internal conflicts, the echo of war left a riddle that would endure in the collective memory. What would have become of Andalusia if the French intervention had not occurred? The struggles for independence and the search for a new social order not only marked the history of the region, but also left an indelible mark on the hearts of its people. The war, although it brought promises, also sowed doubts. The scars of war would not close easily. Political tensions, along with the arrival of the Industrial Revolution, would further transform the Andalusian landscape. The 19th century would continue to be a period of upheaval, where the search for identity and social justice intertwined with the struggle for modernization. Andalusia, in its essence, found itself at a crossroads. In this context, the mystery of Andalusian resistance resided not only in the battles fought, but in the people's capacity to reinvent themselves. The history of Andalusia in the 19th century is a testament to the relentless struggle for dignity and identity, an echo that would continue to resonate. The Industrial Revolution, which would begin to emerge, promised profound changes. Factories, railroads, and a new way of life would begin to take shape, promising a future that, although uncertain, brought the possibility of a new awakening. Social unrest would give way to a new order that would forever change the face of Andalusia. The Industrial Revolution, a phenomenon that shook Europe in the 19th century, began to leave its marks on the region. But how would this change manifest in a land marked by its history, its traditions, and its peculiar socio-economic structure? At the end of the 18th century, Andalusia was in a state of transition. The influence of the Inquisition was still perceptible, while the economy relied to a large extent on agriculture and artisanal production. In this scenario, the arrival of new ideas and technologies would begin to challenge the traditional way of life. The influence of Enlightenment thought and reformist currents started to pave the way toward an industrial future. The old power structures were threatened by the advance of capitalism. Among the key actors of this period were both local elites, who resisted change, and reformist movements advocating for the adoption of new technologies. Figures such as the Count of Fernán Núñez, who promoted agricultural modernization, or the anonymous workers who, for the first time, organized into associations to defend their rights. It was a time of crucial decisions where ambition and fear coexisted. The development of events that would mark the Industrial Revolution in Andalusia was a gradual process, yet profoundly transformative. First, the introduction of the steam engine, initially in mining, began to modify the methods of resource extraction, especially in the Sierra de Huelva. The copper and silver mines, vital to the Andalusian economy, were modernized, and with them, new employment opportunities arose. However, this advancement brought with it a new type of labor exploitation where workers faced inhumane conditions. As the decade of the 1830s progressed, the textile and construction sectors also began to experience transformation. The arrival of factories, driven by British capital investment, altered the urban landscape. Cities like Seville and Cadiz saw their streets filled with workers seeking a place in this new order. But was this progress truly an advancement or a trap that condemned workers to a life of hardship? The immediate consequences of the Industrial Revolution in Andalusia were varied. On one hand, there was an increase in production and the economic capacity of the region, which began to integrate into commercial networks. However, this growth was not uniform. Rural areas where agriculture remained the main source of income felt increasingly deprived. Rural exodus began to become a reality, with thousands of peasants abandoning their lands. This movement generated social tensions. Amid this transformation, a persistent enigma remained: how to reconcile the legacy of a traditional Andalusia with the demands of an emerging industrial world. The answer was not simple, and the conflict between tradition and modernity became increasingly evident. The arrival of the Industrial Revolution not only altered the economy, but also called into question the very identity of Andalusia. Thus, as factories began to smoke, a crucial question emerged. Would the Industrial Revolution be the lifeline that Andalusia needed, or a shadow that would loom over its cultural and social legacy? With this uncertainty, the chapter of the Industrial Revolution in Andalusia closed, but its repercussions were still far from resolved. The echo of modernity was preparing to clash with the ideals of freedom and social justice that would germinate in the Second Republic and the Civil War. In the search for an Andalusia rediscovering itself, the next chapter will take us to explore how these events shaped the future of the region in tumultuous times. Industrial modernization would soon become a storm that would shake the foundations of Andalusia. In the first half of the 20th century, the Iberian Peninsula was engulfed in a climate of political and social instability. The proclamation of the Second Republic in 1931 marked a milestone in the history of Spain, a bold attempt to transform the country into a democratic model that promised rights but also contained the elements that would lead to conflict. Andalusia, with its rich cultural heritage and deep social divisions, became a reflection of the tensions experienced at the national level. In this context, Andalusian peasants who had endured centuries of inequality began to raise their voices. The agrarian reform promoted by the Republican government aimed to correct these injustices. However, the resistance of the landowning elites and the lack of effective implementation led to growing frustration. The promises of the Republic would soon transform into a distant echo. Among the figures that emerged at this crossroads was Manuel Azana, one of the most emblematic leaders of the Second Republic, whose reformist fervour clashed with the reality of a divided country. In Andalusia, the figure of the anarchist Francisco Ferrer was also a symbol of the struggle for education and freedom. But among the defenders of the Republic, the shadow of reaction also loomed. The Spanish Confederation of Autonomous Rightists, led by José María Gil Robles, represented the conservative forces. This struggle between progress and reaction intensified with the arrival of the Civil War in 1936. The outbreak of war was, in many ways, a reflection of the polarization that had been brewing. On the 17th of July in 1936, a military uprising led by General Francisco Franco began to unleash chaos that would soon spread throughout Spain. In Andalusia, the initial support for the Republic was strong, especially in Córdoba and Málaga, where workers and peasants rose in defense of their rights. But as the conflict progressed, the brutality of the war revealed a dark aspect. The repression of the rebels translated into a series of executions that left deep scars. As the fronts consolidated, the province of Granada became a key point. The city itself was a Republican stronghold. But its capture by Franco's troops in 1936 was a devastating blow. The fall of Granada not only meant a strategic defeat, but also symbolized the end of a dream for many Andalusians. The repression that followed Franco's victory was relentless, with thousands of Andalusians facing imprisonment, exile, or death. The immediate consequences of these events were devastating. Andalusia not only suffered the loss of lives, but was marked by an atmosphere of fear and distrust that would endure for decades. Communities fragmented, and many of those who had fought for a cause found themselves on the opposite side of history, persecuted by the same forces they had once supported. The Civil War left a legacy of pain that would perpetuate in the collective memory. But what secrets still awaited in the depths of this history? What hidden truths remained silenced under the shadows of repression? The Second Republic and the Civil War in Andalusia were not only a chapter of political struggle, but also an enigma that invites reflection on human nature and the fragility of hope. As the shadow of Francoism loomed over Andalusia, the region would begin to experience a profound change, a period in which life under Franco's regime would further transform its social and political dynamics. The next chapter will explore the impact of the dictatorship on Andalusian identity. The end of the war would give way to a period of repression and stagnation in Andalusia. The Spanish Civil War, a heartbreaking conflict that divided the country, left deep scars on Andalusian society. The victory of the Francoist side in 1939 established a regime that would shape the destiny of the region for almost 4 decades. The Francoist era was characterized by censorship, a lack of freedoms, and the pursuit of a homogeneous national identity that stripped Andalusia of its rich diversity. The historical context surrounding the beginning of Franco's dictatorship was complex. The Second Republic had promised social and political reforms. However, tensions between classes, ideologies, and regions had created a climate of instability that culminated in the war. With the arrival of Francisco Franco to power, the promise of a new Spain turned into an echo of authoritarianism. The figure of the dictator, supported by the army and conservative sectors, emerged as a symbol of Spanish nationalism, which sought to blur the cultural particularities of regions like Andalusia. The key figures in this narrative are Franco himself and the high-ranking officials of the regime, who implemented decisions that would mark the lives of millions of Andalusians. In an attempt to consolidate his power, Franco imposed a policy of centralization that sought to eliminate autonomies. Andalusian culture was seen as an obstacle to national unity. This translated into the repression of cultural expressions that did not align with Francoist ideology. During the first decades of the regime, the people of Andalusia found themselves trapped between history and oppression. The economy, for its part, also underwent a profound change. The economic autarky imposed by the regime aimed to make Spain a self-sufficient country. However, this policy resulted in misery and economic stagnation. Especially in Andalusia, the lands that were once fertile transformed into a landscape of unemployment and disillusionment. The 1950s brought a turn, faced with international pressure and the need to modernize the economy. The regime opened up to foreign investment and industrialization. This led to a massive exodus of Andalusians to other regions of Spain and abroad. This phenomenon left the Andalusian countryside desolate and the cities filled with migrants. In this context, the construction of dams and the modernization of agriculture began to transform the rural environment. However, these transformations did not come without a cost. Industrialization often occurred at the expense of traditions. Political repression and social tensions continued to mark life in Andalusia. Opposition groups, although persecuted, began to organize in secrecy. The figure of resistance began to emerge with movements demanding rights. In this environment, culture became a vehicle of resistance. Andalusian music, poetry, and art began to flourish in a context of repression, becoming an echo of the struggle for identity. The end of the Francoist era was driven by events that destabilized the regime. The rise of the opposition and international pressure, along with the regime's inability to respond to the needs of the population, led to a climate of unrest. The streets of Andalusia, which had been silenced for years, began to resonate with the clamor of a people yearning for freedom. The immediate consequences of these events were profound. The death of Franco in 1975 not only marked the end of an era, but also left a void that generated uncertainty. The transition to democracy loomed as a new enigma, a labyrinth of decisions. How would a fractured society be rebuilt? What legacy would remain from years of oppression? Thus, the Francoist era in Andalusia reveals itself as a crucial chapter full of questions. The search for identity and the struggle for freedom intertwine in a fabric of history. As the echoes of a complicated past fade, the hope for a brighter future begins to emerge. In the next chapter, the history of Andalusia will delve into the transition to democracy, a process that will involve the construction of a renewed identity. The end of the dictatorship would give way to a new dawn. The shadow of Franco's regime was slowly fading, revealing an expectation of change that spread throughout Andalusian society. The decade of the 1970s marked a period of crucial transformations, where the voice of the people began to resonate in a political landscape that had been silenced. Amid a context of repression, the quest for freedom and democracy became the driving force of an imminent change. The historical context of the transition in Andalusia cannot be understood without considering the state of Spain at the time. Franco had left a legacy of authoritarianism, and in Andalusia, this reality manifested with particular intensity. The region had been a stronghold of republican resistance, and the scars of that conflict were still visible. Labor struggles, student movements, and clandestine organizations began to germinate, sowing the seeds of radical change. Key figures emerged in this crucible of transformation. Adolfo Suárez, appointed president of the government in 1976, played a fundamental role in the political opening. His vision of a democratic Spain would translate into a series of reforms that, although timid at first, were crucial for dismantling the regime. However, other actors, such as leaders of social movements and political parties that began to resurge, were also essential pieces. The decisions made during this period were grounded in a context of social pressure. On the 15th of December in 1976, a referendum endorsed the political reform, paving the way for a process that promised a new era. In Andalusia, the streets began to fill with demonstrators, and the figure of the autonomous movement emerged strongly. The Democratic Board of Andalusia, formed by various political groups, became the unified voice demanding recognition of Andalusian identity and autonomy. The development of events in this crucial chapter was swift. In 1977, the first democratic elections were held, and the people of Andalusia went to the polls with the hope of leaving behind years of darkness. The victory of the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party in the 1979 elections was a decisive moment. With the arrival to power of Felipe González, the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party promoted the idea of an autonomous Andalusia, a concept that resonated deeply with the population. However, this process was not without tensions. The struggle for autonomy intensified, and the differences between the various Andalusian provinces became evident. Amid this climate, on the 28th of February in 1980, a referendum was held seeking an autonomous status for Andalusia. Although the response was a clear support, the path towards the official recognition of autonomy became complicated. The immediate consequences of these events were profound. The proclamation of the Statute of Autonomy of Andalusia in 1981 marked the birth of a new era where the people of Andalusia would begin to take the reins of their own destiny. The creation of the Board of Andalusia and the establishment of a regional government were achievements that represented a significant advance towards self-determination. However, the path was not without obstacles. The great unknown of the chapter looms over the question of whether the transition truly met the expectations of the people of Andalusia. Despite the achievements, was there a latent feeling of disappointment over unfulfilled promises? During this period, the echo of promises of freedom resonated, but doubts also arose about the ability of the new authorities to face the challenges. Thus, the transition to democracy in Andalusia presents itself as a journey filled with light and shadows, a process that, although marked by hope, left unanswered questions. The struggle for identity and autonomy had only just begun, and the echo of history would continue to resonate, shaping a future that was yet to be written. As this chapter closes, the horizon of a new challenge comes into view. The Andalusia of the 1980s was preparing to enter the 21st century with a renewed identity, but also with the burden of a complex legacy. The echo of history resonates in every corner of Andalusia, a land rich in nuances that has managed to reinvent itself over the centuries. In this final chapter, we delve into the 21st century, a period marked by challenges and achievements within a context of democracy and belonging to the European community. As a landscape of great complexity, contemporary Andalusia reveals a scenario where the shadows of the past still influence the quest for the future. As we close the previous chapter, we glimpse the process of democratic transition, the arrival of democracy in Spain in the 1970s with the proclamation of the Constitution of 1978. signified a rebirth for Andalusia. However, this rebirth was not without difficulties. The region faced the challenge of establishing its identity in a country struggling to overcome the aftermath of a dictatorial regime. The creation of the autonomous community of Andalusia in 1982 was a crucial step, but what has this autonomy really meant for the people of Andalusia? In the last decade, Andalusia has been involved in a process of modernization and adaptation to a constantly changing Europe. Through policies focused on economic and social development, the community has sought to position itself as a relevant actor. The incorporation of European funds has been fundamental in driving projects. However, the echo of inequality continues to resonate. Despite the advancements, Andalusia presents unemployment rates that exceed the national average, and the economic gaps between provinces are notable. In this web of challenges, key figures emerge. The presidents of the Junta of Andalusia, from José Rodríguez de la Borbolla to Juanma Moreno, have been protagonists in shaping the community's direction. Each has faced critical decisions in the face of the global economic crisis and the effects of climate change. How do these decisions affect the daily lives of the people of Andalusia? The development of tourism, a pillar of the Andalusian economy, has been a topic of controversy. Although it has generated employment, it has also brought with it a dilemma: sustainability. The overcrowding of iconic destinations such as the Alhambra or the beaches of the Costa del Sol raises questions. Is it possible to balance economic growth with the preservation of cultural and natural heritage? The answer lies in the search for a tourism model that respects the authenticity of the region, culture. Another of Andalusia's legacies has also evolved in the 21st century. The fusion of traditions with contemporary influences has led to a creative explosion. Andalusian artists, musicians, and creators have found new forms of expression. However, the recognition of this cultural wealth does not always translate into institutional support. What future awaits a community that struggles to preserve its identity in an increasingly homogeneous world? As the 21st century progresses, the youth of Andalusia find themselves at a crossroads. With broader access to higher education, young people face the pressure to leave their land in search of opportunities. This phenomenon of brain drain poses a puzzle. How can Andalusia retain its talent and foster innovation without sacrificing its roots? Initiatives to attract young people to entrepreneurship are vital. Social issues have also been at the center of debate. Cultural diversity and the fight for equality have gained prominence. Movements for the rights of women and the LGBTI community have gained strength, challenging stereotypes and seeking a more inclusive future. But are these efforts sufficient to change a culture marked by traditions? The historical legacy of Andalusia intertwines with contemporary issues. The Andalusian identity, forged over the centuries, remains a crucial element. In this context, political decisions not only affect the present but also have repercussions for the future. When reflecting on the role of Andalusia in the European context, it is imperative to consider its contribution not only economically but also culturally and socially. The autonomous community faces the demand to be an active part in building a diverse Europe. Can Andalusia be a bridge between the past and the future? The decisions made in the coming years will define the trajectory of Andalusia. The search for a balance between modernity and the preservation of its legacy will be key. As the world faces climate crises and social transformations, Andalusia has the opportunity to position itself as a model of resilience. Thus, we reach the end of our journey. A journey filled with stories, of lights and shadows, of legacies that persist. In this land where every corner tells a story, the question remains: what secrets still await in the depths of its rich and complex identity? The echo of the past merges with the aspirations of the present, leaving an indelible mark. Andalusia, a place where time stops and reinvents itself, continues to be an enigma to be solved, a legacy to be discovered, and an identity to be defined. On this path, each step becomes an opportunity to understand not only the essence of Andalusia, but that of humanity itself.